Feel free at any time to ask me to clarify or flesh out anything I might say. But you want just a little bit of autobiography? Is that what you're saying? Just a
Yeah,
little
just
bit.
a little bit, just so people are kind of can have it, get a picture of what you
Well,
create and what you do.
yeah, it's relevant too. So I'll try to do it it'll be a rather large nutshell, but the larger story will inform some people that are looking for information in certain ways. So I'm 52 now, and I've been, I didn't enter into the so-called art world uh, knowingly until I was 34. Okay, so some people might look at my work and my trajectory to understand I didn't grow up around the arts. I grew up in a rural agrarian industrial community in Oregon, and it wasn't that people lacked creativity; we just didn't call it art. My parents were kind of post-hippie agrarians, and so they had a real they liked good music. They liked we had some we lived in a mobile home. We had a few old paintings that were facsimiles of old Spanish paintings because we lived in Spain a little bit in the 60s. And there was a craft. My dad actually built a little building to do for craft work, so people would make wood and pots, throw pots. But the conversations about art were always something you did like they were like an aesthetic that you would have around the house, but it wasn't something that anyone would pursue as a lifestyle choice. And academics were not part of that at all. Weren't a lot of college educated persons where I grew up. Most of the people I knew growing up, not most, in the immediate community I grew up in, most people were autodidacts, self-taught, avid readers, but et cetera. So then when I came then I spent about 20 years in the auto body industry. So that's where my skill sets were refined that I use so actively now. Most of them, formal skill sets, were 2 decades in auto body collision repair. So in my mid 30s, really frustrated with how unhappy I was with being in the automobile industry. Vicki and I and the kids moved to Kansas from Oregon I'd fallen in love with this notion of Kansas, small town Kansas, based on a visit. Landed in Abilene, Kansas, and a year later I found myself at Kansas State University as a freshman, a 34-year-old freshman, not knowing what to study.
Right.
But so I was just taking exploratory classes. In a nutshell, I was hoping to get a degree in getting out of the body shop.
Yeah.
I was looking down the course list, and there's got to be a degree that says that get out of the body shop free, And I just didn't want to go back to that industry, and or spend my life there, I should say. And so, at any rate, a couple semester or two in, I'm in a 3D design course. Long story short, first time in my life I didn't just get permission to make objects that I wished to make. I got credit for it. It wasn't called screwing around.
Yeah.
When I was in the body shop, I was always doing these goofy ass I was either playing jokes on colleagues or I was making these constructions that were outside of what we were supposed to be doing, And I was always kind of, feeling guilty about it or trying to hide them because it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing at work. And then all of a sudden, I could not believe it. Are you kidding me? I'm getting course credit,
Right.
To make things up. And that's when it all broke loose for me. So, and then that was, I graduated K-State in 2003.
Real quick, was there like a piece that you did? Sorry, my chair just just sunk. Was there a piece that you did, or was there something in particular that you created that was like that
Yeah.
light bulb moment, or was it just
Yeah, it is. And it's not the first piece I made, but it's the first piece I made that I became aware. I was told that it was art. So I made all this stuff back in the body shop years. I made things, but I didn't think of them as art. I thought of them as like little leaps into freedom, the freedom to create things. But they didn't occur to me that they were art. They do now in retrospect, but the piece that you're asking about does exist. And Mike Michaelis has it at the Emprise Bank Collection. He bought it. And it's called Space Tractor. And what happened was I was at K-State. I don't even think I was a declared sculpture major yet. Because I was trying to figure out which discipline in the art would be the one that would allow me the most latitude.
Mm-hmm.
And, sculpture presented itself pretty quickly because it's pretty broadly defined. And And so I was messing around, and I found these two aluminum cone lampshades, these sort of, mid-century conical lampshades you see in these little dime stores and stuff. And I was sticking them together, and I thought, man, these look like a spaceship fuselage. And then I'd also spent years as a cartoonist. I'd cartooned since the early 90s and had some success with that. But the cartoonist mind, my cartoonist mind, and a lot of cartoonist minds, is always like, how can you take the familiar and either invert it or look at it from another side to where it becomes both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time? Like, how can you take the familiar and make it, unveil it as something more mysterious? And I thought, well, what's the opposite of a spaceship? And I thought, well, a tractor seems to me to be the vehicular antithesis of a spaceship. This plodding, earthbound cast iron thing that, it's just a lumbering beast.
The evolution of man. Yeah. It's like the first one. It's
yeah. And so I took and I tried to make a toy that was a spaceship tractor called Space Tractor, and it came out. It's the piece I could never make again because it was the only art piece. It was the first piece I made for the sheer joy of entering into the permission to the art world, and I was so excited about all the arts at that time because it was all so new to me. And so I made the piece, not thinking of it as art, but in the freedom of the moment. And so the piece is really delightfully unencumbered with any sort of theory or academic language, although it was made at the beginning of that era of my life. And that piece, so it's this spaceship with a tractor carriage, and it's got a little trailer that purports to be carrying radium that glows green, and it's all kind of messed up. And yet it still ended up being really beautiful. This sort of lumbering space age thing, and I made a box for it and everything, but it all came together in that piece. And I still thought I was screwing around. And some of the graduate students at K-State who are far more along in their reading and their theory and their understanding of art history than me, because I was still just a real raw novice at that point to the art world, they called me out. They said, "Look, man, this is art. I mean, you've hit it. This is real art." And it kind of sobered me up, and then the pressure started to build. Like, well, how do you follow that up?
Yeah. Were you encouraged? You kind of mentioned that your work was sort of different than the other students who maybe had the knowledge, but were you discouraged or encouraged by being different like that, or was that a factor at all?
Yeah, I didn't give that. I've probably given that more thought later years. At the time, I was just in the moment,
just making stuff.
And making stuff. Yeah, and it puzzles me still. It doesn't puzzle me so much. The idea that it was a toy was not really that preconceived. The Space Tractor, I'd had a history in the 90s of doing some antique toy restoration for collectors because in the body shop industry, I ran into some people came in and wanted toys. I don't know if we could match color, paint, patina for very rare old toys, and like touch them up or repair a piece. And I fell for that hook, line, and sinker. I've never sort of fallen out of love with toys. And so it doesn't surprise me that the first thing I made as a sculpture of my own volition was a toy-like thing. That's a language that I've carried with me. And sort of a love affair that hasn't subsided. That being said, the thing that sort of got me to sort of come back to your prompt, the thing that caught me then and that got me a little sideways was that I immediately started to look at the history of art to see who else had made fictional vintage toys.
Okay. Oh wow.
And didn't find a lot of colleagues out there,
yeah.
Right? That's not what you're getting,
yeah.
And that's still the case. I mean, it's so I stumbled onto this rather. It's not unique. There are a lot of artists who reference toys or who utilize it, collect toys or talk about the relationship of play and childhood. But I very quickly found that I couldn't. If I was going to look to see who else had done what I was doing as a way to sort of take courage in that wasn't going to happen. As opposed to being a landscape painter or an illustrator where you could find a history of people who have done it
Right.
and find the people within that history that you really admire and then study their work. I didn't have access to that. So I had to sort of just choose not to see that as an obstacle, but rather as an opening.
Okay. Now, when kind of transitioning to what you're doing right now, is there anything you're working on right now? I mean, you don't have to talk about it. I guess I kind of am interested more in, where do you get your ideas now? Do you jump into something like without, inspiration, or do you have to wait for that? Does that have to come to you, or is that something you seek out?
The inspiration, I have sketchbooks that if I were to not have another idea, I could spend 10 years just trying to get to the ideas I've already written down. I don't suffer for inspiration. It's more of I don't suffer for lack of inspiration. I'm very fortunate creative in that respect, and I do know where to get it. Reading for me, when I read, and I read relatively eclectically. It's not terribly specific, but I find that while I'm reading, whatever it is that I'm reading, whether it's sort of like theory or philosophy, or I read some fiction, and or even lyrical music, like like sort of a James McMurtry or Jackson Brown, these sort of singer-songwriters, troubadour kind of music about the American experience. These images of objects will just come to me right in the midst of that, and frankly, I have trouble sometimes just finishing a page in a book because I want to go out and start building that thing.
Yeah.
And so, but the problem with that is it's a little bit like a good coffee buzz or a good beer buzz. At the height of it, you feel like you've really stumbled upon something that just has to happen, or it's amazing. And then the other side of that moment is the possibility that or the likelihood that then the actual making of that work and the industry required and the expense and the time, that buzz goes away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And it was a good idea, but not all good ideas have to become concrete objects.
Yeah.
I don't suffer for ideas. It's figuring out which of those could survive the test of industry and time and expenditure, and actually the other side.
How do you? I might have come to this later, but it's a good point to bring it up. When that block comes up, or when that buzz goes away, how do you get through that? Or
if the idea is a legitimate, if the idea is that's my cat, that's my coffee.
No, oh good. Oh, do you need to?
No, it's not carpet. It's an industrial floor.
Okay, we can pause if you need to. No, that's
what the explosion was. It's my cat helping me out. I knew he was going to get involved. The idea, if the idea is worth pursuing to its completion, its conclusion, the concept, the draw, it will draw you through the wasteland, the valley of labor and doubt and insecurity. If the idea is good enough, it'll be waiting for you on the other side to complete it. That being said, there are ideas that just sort of die in the desert. I don't want to call it a desert because the making process can be pretty wonderful, but it's like the ideas, the concepts that come to me when I'm in a good imaginative phase, which is usually early morning, which is concurrent with coffee, or at a good bar with good friends and good conversations. Those are the two times where the ideas just really flow.
Yeah.
Conversations with people who are good, who are nice to talk to, and imaginative. Or early morning, where it's just you and your cup of coffee and a book or some other ideas. I guess books and music are also conversations. I would see them in the same light as I would meeting people over a table. But that in between time, like when I had my studio in Wichita, which you were in briefly, the interior of that space was essentially a big windowless cavern. and it was me post coffee, pre going out with friends, and a lot of stuff and a lot of weight and a lot of like, oh my God, I've got all this space and all this material, and I've got an idea that no one else is waiting on. It better be a good one.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And 5 years of that got pretty wearying. I learned a lot from that, and that, a lot of what were probably good ideas couldn't hold up to the strain of that much architecture and that much stress and that much pressure to perform. So I would say a lot of ideas that are really justified don't survive that passage in a making landscape, because there's too much expense that all the demons start coming in about 1 PM. Well, what if this isn't that good when it's done? What if it's going to cost more than this? What if nobody buys it?
Right.
It's very complicated, and it's interesting. So back to another thing you asked, what am I doing now? Is what's ironic about letting go of the whole Wichita building, which was a dream studio, absolute white male dream studio, was that, and now I'm in a little apartment in Kansas City, and we're packing to move again, and I don't have a studio right now. Is that these ideas are coming up that I think I wouldn't have given them their due in Wichita, because they wouldn't have. They didn't happen there because they wouldn't have subsidized the amount of space I had to hold on to, physical space and industry, sort of industrial space. So now what I'm really fascinated about are some ideas I have now that might just totally survive and thrive because I don't need to make a living from them.
Yeah. Okay.
My living is going to come from elsewhere now for a while.
Yeah. I don't know if that leads into this, but you were talking about some ideas that aren't able to come to fruition. Are those failures, and if not, or if there's some variation of that, how do you define failure in your process? I had when I was in graduate school, one of my faculty members who was at one time in his life was a very avid mountain climber, and one of these types that would try to climb mountains that were not, well, I don't know any mountain is intended to be climbed, but he was one that would seek out the most extreme variations of that. And he said that he would get into a position a couple of times in his career before he gave that up, where he would be in such a difficult place. It was life-threatening, where his life was in balance. He couldn't see any way forward because this wasn't a face that had been climbed before. There weren't any spikes or whatever they call them, pylons. Nothing had been driven into it to aid him. And the last place he'd moved from, he couldn't go back to that because that was unreachable. He'd at a different angle. So he called it failing upwards. Mountain climbing is failing upwards. When you have no choice but to survive is to just create a handhold, or imagine that some people would call it faith, that if you reach around that corner of that thing, there'll be something to grab hold of and pull yourself up. So failure, I never see failure as a position of retreat or fall back. What I tend to see failure as, if I have to define it in my own life, failure is where things just haven't all lined up equally. Like, okay, so you could say, it could be said that I failed to make I failed to make a consistent and robust living in Wichita in a building that was completely capable of making a living for someone. I had everything at my disposal in Wichita. I had the yard, had friends and colleagues, and a relatively low cost of living, and an amazing workspace, coffee, donuts, beer, pizza. There was nothing that I lacked formally in Wichita. Where my practice, in my mind, could be construed as failure. What I was unable to do in the 5 years in Wichita was make a consistent living as a visual artist. I would sell work here and there, but it was never consistent enough to become any sort of reliable method or practice. So failure must be, in that sense, is composed of a lot of things. There's not a predestined market for my work yet, or maybe there just isn't a predestined market for fictional vintage toys that play fast and loose with
with a lot of things. Or maybe I'm just not good at marketing, or maybe my refusal to make product, which I've been told by many people that if I just made something that was consumable at a certain level, that would be the answer. There have been many conversations with many people about why I haven't made more of a living at my work based on the fascination that enough people have with it. But so it's not a failure. There are all these little things that just don't all line up. And then the other thing is to somehow define failure as the inability to make a consistent living. Well, that's not really failure either. That's that could be construed as a type of failure. But there are other ways to make a living than forcing the contemporary art making into sort of an American corporate model, a Western corporate model of capitalism, where if you just make enough of these things for enough money, that'll add up to this. And art doesn't fit well into that model anyway.
Yeah.
So failure is just such a woolly term, because I've had successes that, I mean, my gosh, if you look at the history of what we so now call famous artists, like a Vincent van Gogh, who sold a couple paintings to his brother in his life, right? People don't talk about Van Gogh as a failure in contemporary terms, but in his lifetime, he was a terribly troubled man who had no success, or very little, and now he's wildly admired. So, what does that term mean? It's hard to say.
Okay, so that I don't know if that, again, these might lead into the next question, but I don't know. But what is the scariest thing you've encountered in your creative life? And that can be a physical or a.
Yeah, no, so my wife and I were just talking this morning, and she made some comment. She goes, "Well, you've got your demons, but fear isn't one of them." And part of that's being, just an educated white male. I got a lot of entitlements. I got it easy compared to a lot of people. So I've got this built-in support structure that's called 20th Century America, 21st century, that's made a lot of things easy for me. So I have to be careful about talking about fear, because a lot of people fear are things that just haven't been put in my path, obstructions that I haven't faced as a white guy with an education. But that being said, a few years ago I did have probably the only panic attack I've ever had. And it was at the height of my success, which is, the irony doesn't escape me, success being a relative term. But in 2012, my installation piece, New Penny's Last Stand, a black and white toy store, the modular toy store that I show around the country, was selected to be shown at Art Miami, and during the big Art Basel, Art Miami, huge international art fair. And the gallery in New York that represents me secured a location for me, and I loaded the thing up in Wichita and drove all the way to Miami. I left too late. I left harried. I tried to force the work to conclusion. I didn't call ahead and make sure that everything was copacetic on the Miami end. And without going through the horror that week was, starting with the piece blowing apart, part of the roof blew off at 4 o'clock in the morning, entering Miami after driving all night through Florida. And I'm running down the interstate trying to drag part of the only piece of artwork I had off, and an 18-wheeler ran over it.
Oh my God.
And then I found me a couple hours later sleeping in my van in a park, because there was no hotel that I thought there was. It wasn't ready, it wasn't available. And a break-in at the motel I ended up staying at, and this, that, and the other thing, and I dropped a screwdriver bit on a $200,000 piece of artwork that I was trying to help some people move, and I spilled coffee on a $11,000 print. I mean, you can't make this shit up, right? It was, if this were it was just horrifying. Somewhere in the midst of that, I just had a practically complete meltdown. And because this was supposed to be this was the crest of my career as I was envisioning it. And I got the work up, okay, and it was just it could have mattered less. It was the context to where they gave me to put my work was at the entrance of Art Miami, but it's this huge fiberglass building. It looks like a giant porta potty. The building is like this vacuum thermoformed paneling.
Yeah.
And then New Penny, which is meant to be seen, at artist intention, and 50 cents is worth that much. But it was meant to be seen in this sort of like particular type of landscape, sort of singled out, lit.
Yeah.
So it's basically sitting on a angled gravel ledge. So I had to put blocks underneath the front of it. It looked like basically it looked like the switch box for Art Miami. Like if you were to paint, you're like, oh, that must be where you keep the fuses for the. Oh, it was horrible. It was I'd driven, and we'd overextended ourselves financially. The whole thing couldn't have been worse.
Yeah.
And finally I called. I just had a flip phone at the time. I lost my bearings in Miami. I didn't know north, south, east, west. So I'm calling my wife. She's trying to work. At the same time, she's on her computer telling me where I am and how to get to my hotel.
Okay.
Which is a rough hotel. I mean, broken off door latches and crap. And finally, I just slept for like a day or two, and I kind of got out of the fog. But I journaled about that. I shared it with some friends, and then I just quit. I just had to let it go because it was so painful. But it was that was an experience, and to sort of bring that experience back down into somewhat of a response to your question, I had grasped at what a lot of artists, particularly younger artists, and it's sort of the very capitalist model. Like when you get your big chance, take it. Whatever you do, don't say no. If I had pulled back from that whole thing and looked at it objectively, which I was unable to do before, I would have said, I'm not ready to go to Miami with this. The work's not ready. We don't have enough money if it doesn't work out. Things on that end aren't clear. It's not clear that the gallery even knew what my work was that they were showing. And it really couldn't have been any other way.
Yeah.
And so tremendous. So in that sense, that whole week wasn't a failure.
Right.
I learned as much in that week as I got from 2 years of graduate school in terms of what really happens when you get that big gig.
Yeah.
And I'll bet you there's a lot of musicians out there that could top my story easy, showing up for some gig somewhere and like, oh, well, the power's out.
Right.
Stick set. You don't even have it, whatever.
Well, I don't know. I mean, physically having to track down a roof on the highway, and I think that's.
I could have been killed doing that.
Yeah.
And
no.
Yeah. Was that if I don't show up with work, who am I?
Yeah.
My ego was so out in front of that whole thing that it almost took my life.
Jeez.
People say, oh my God, you're at Art Miami, and I twitch.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to know this story.
I think that definitely fulfills every aspect of that question, like physical, scared, and.
Oh, and I didn't, pooping in a Home Depot bucket. I mean, I haven't told you. I just told you this one. Crapping in a van in Miami at 4 a.m. because there aren't even public restrooms. You're like, oh, this is arrival.
Yeah,
I made it.
Welcome to Miami.
Yeah, right.
Well, so you kind of said, you journaled about it and you talked to friends about it, and then you said you kind of let it go. Is that, when overcoming something like that, or, maybe a lesser but similar experience, do you kind of let those things go? I mean, because it seems like the experience has been baked into you. Like you said, that's like 2 years of grad school that you learned in that trip. So it seems like that experience has baked something into you. But, when overcoming something like that, is there a theme to how you deal with that, or is it just kind of one at a time? We're just trying to make it through these things, or what is it?
Yeah, the realization that came with that, or has come since that. Sorry, I can see that the sunlight's blasting into your. I don't know if I can do anything about that. Sorry.
That's fine. No worries.
So what's come out of that? So that's 2012. It's been 4 or 5 years now. That was like the beginning of a major break with what what I perceived success in the art world to be, as in, i.e., not failure, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you don't say no to big opportunities at big places for big press. And I grew up in a culture, a very Western American culture, that big opportunities are a big deal, and you have your big break, whatever you call it. There's a lot of big in there that we talk about, big breaks, big opportunities, And that week broke the back of that belief for me. Then there was the long tail of that comet, which was, well, then if everything I thought I knew isn't true, what now? What next? And that was compounded by my dad dying that year. And so there was a year and a half and there in Wichita, 12 to 13, that I was just lost, emotionally and sort of psychologically. Just was questioning everything that I had thought I'd come to know, and my education in the arts and my practice and who I was, and did it matter, and why, and the way I started to crawl out of that was, I know enough about myself, and self-knowledge is key. I mean, just being aware of oneself and trying to recognize patterns in yourself, and ask yourself why it is, why do we believe these things, and are they really true, and what do we really know? Trust yourself to know yourself. And I decided to try to make a piece of work to get out of this deep sense of loss and uncertainty about what had all happened and what did it mean, and what was the future of art if that was as good as if that was my big gig. And so I made a piece that Mike Michaelis, he comes up frequently in this interview. He owns this too. I made a piece called "The Machine to Dispel Sadness, X1," and it's in the Emprise Bank on Broadway. You can walk right in there. Yeah. It's publicly accessible. It's a 8-foot long silver and orange ocean liner piece with this aircraft mounted to the top of it, sort of a composite of aircraft, of ship and aircraft and spaceship and all that. Has a little blue figure in it. And the whole machine, as I saw it, the concept of the piece is, what if I could build a machine that would ameliorate depression, or ease sorrow, or lift spirits? And so I thought, well, it was either that or meds. So, and I tried antidepressants for a while, and they didn't work. They just made me feel gray instead of not better, which was a nice break, but it wasn't sustainable. So I quit that and decided to work my way out of this. So I made that piece, and that was the first piece I've made in my career that was meant to be beauty for the sake of beauty, and still have meaning invested in it in a conceptual way. And that was how I began to address it, and that's led me forward towards that, and a lot of sort of changing my reading list, reading a lot more about well, frankly, what I've been doing is doing a lot of reading and studying about the ego, and the amount of control that our ego has over us, and whether that's healthy or not. In my experience, no, it's not been healthy. And there's a lot of people who practice certain forms of meditation and what have you, and I'm not here to be a proponent of any particular thing, but I will say that a year ago I started doing 20-minute silent meditations each morning, where you just spend 20 minutes just trying to not let my mind run the course of the day, order up the day. And it's a battle, because the mind is very powerful, and particularly the creative mind has a lot of ideas. They're all exciting. And I have been so much healthier this last year than I have been prior. And what I've become to sort of at the point I'm at now, speaking to you, because I'll have access to studio space in Oregon here in a few weeks, and once we get on our feet, I will absolutely make work again. But what I'm thinking about a lot now, and this is all very related to the Miami experience, losing Dad and what have you, is, what is, where's my center point of peace really? And it's not in imagining that I would go to Miami and be a big success next time. It's not that this, that, or the other thing that would look big. It's just having a general sense of peacefulness during the day. and allowing the artwork to be a part of that conversation, but not expecting what I make in art to deliver us to some sort of mighty place of, arrival. No longer to see my artwork or my career as something that will arrive us to some mountaintop or place of incredible, firm security, but rather just allow it to be a part of my day-to-day existence and attend to it with as much just to give it its due attention, and then but get the back to the ego thing without I'm still working through this myself. But when I went to Miami, that whole trip and that whole thing was driven by this very, very powerful egoic notion that you have to do it, and you have to do it to succeed, and success is good, and at whatever costs. Because it didn't just cost me to do that. My wife was incredibly stressed knowing that her husband was going batshit loony in a van with Kansas plates and a U-Haul trailer in traffic, right? Yeah. On a flip phone.
Yeah.
It was bad for everybody.
Yeah.
That was all ego driven. All ego driven. And now that I've got my ego on a leash, because I still have it. You gotta. I mean, I'm going to feed me today because I'm important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But I'm important to me. It's fascinating to see how the artwork, the type of art I want to make next, has really sort of dropped in scale and ambition, but it's still every bit as it's there. It hasn't receded. The desire to make it has not receded at all. Just what does it have to do for me? What does it have to deliver is just a whole other dynamic. Yeah. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I'll let you know. I that Machine to Dispel Sadness X1, that was a breakthrough. And I wouldn't imagine that anyone looking at it would differentiate that radically from anything I'd made prior. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I'll make that, I don't need to make that piece again, but something has happened there. And this is almost like half of a conversation that we'll have to have in a year from now. And you should ask me then. So what did you learn? You were talking a lot of shit, right? What now?
Where you at? How's that coming?
How's that working for you? How's that working for you?
I don't doubt you'll have something. Yeah. Kind of getting away from the fear of failure, overcoming that. Is there anything just that kills your inspiration or kills your creativity that you've recognized? You talked about kind of knowing yourself and knowing your habits and being aware. Is there anything that that you've had to either cut out, or maybe you're trying to cut out, or that just kills that for you?
Yeah. On a formal level, hangovers. Yeah. I mean, I'm getting older too, and I love going out for drinks with friends or my wife, and it doesn't take much for me to get a hangover. I'm not a hard drinker, but it doesn't take much. So I guess I'm sort of blessed in that respect. But my morning times are really, really rich creative times for me. And if I'm feeling remorseful and and shitty, too bad for me. I've really screwed up. Yeah. And it doubles down on the remorse and that and everything. So formally, I mean, I've got to really ask myself, where does my treasure lie? And will I continue to compromise it for the sake of hanging out too late and having one too many drinks with friends, which is also where my treasure lies.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe alcohol doesn't have to be the key part of that it has been over all this time. And while still allowing myself to enjoy a good IPA or a glass of wine. So that's something I'm really negotiating, because my body just doesn't give me options.
Yeah. Well, it's hard, anyone having a good time with you might not see that, he doesn't have a problem. It's not a problem. But for you recognize that as...
Recognize in the morning, or if I'm dragging and slog the day and I need to nap at 2 o'clock, I have lost what is irreplaceable, which is time to create. Mm-hmm. And because you just don't get that back. So that's that, and that's not a lecture on alcohol. It's just personal.
Yeah.
Social media, I'm trying to cut way back on how much time I spend checking, getting my dopamine off of something I said on Facebook that I'm, wondering how many people noticed, even, you don't have any idea what that means. I'm trying to wean myself off of that, because if I took if. I can't even imagine how many hours, if I were cumulative hours I've spent on Facebook in the last 3 years, that I probably could have made 6 pieces. But then the other aspect of that, again, it's like all things. It's not, there's this and that, one and the other, is that we're spread out all over the country now. I've got friends and colleagues from Maine to Oregon, all over Kansas and Minnesota, and Facebook's the only way I know anymore to know if my friends are even what they're doing. We don't write letters or even send emails anymore. Nobody calls, and they do. I screen anyway, so I don't answer the phone half the time,
right?
Unless it's my kids. So, well, it doesn't ring, frankly. It's all social media. So I'm trying to figure out how to. It's very analogous to like the alcohol thing. How much is just enough, so you're in touch, or you have that nice time, and you have that experience, and then know what the limits of that are, and that serve creativity and serve relationships, and serve to be human and stay in touch, and then. Because there's a big aspect of being a creative individual that is, frankly, very, very, there's the word. You want it all for yourself. Oh, come on, what's the word for that?
Selfish.
Selfish.
Okay.
You have to believe that this world you're entering into to create your stuff is the most important place. That's how you're. If you're a person that believes you want to contribute to the health of the world and to the social fiber, you've got to believe that somehow this, in my case, a lot of people's practices aren't as solitary as mine, and I would hope that the outcomes of my work aren't solitary, but there are long phases of my practice that are intensely solitary, and you somehow have to selfishly convince yourself that that's justifiable, and good for the world. Mm-hmm. Or just don't have that conversation at all. Like, just put that all away. Maybe that's another better way to put it. Just not have that conversation. Trust that by going into this cave for a week or a day or 6 months, that when you come out the other side, what you have come out with, what you bring back to the tribe, is of value. It's a value-added experience for your fellow country people, right? And that's a dance. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, and I don't remember the exact words you used, but one thing that I meant to address first and got away from is that one thing that really contradicts my best creative intentions is when I enter into the creative realm, because I don't lack for skill sets. So it's not like I could say, I can't come up with something for them like, well, if I just knew how to do this, I could do that. Right. I'm able to make the things I wish to make, or I'm able to find someone who can help me with it. And that's always a good thing. Let someone else help. And I've learned that the hard way. But the thing is that when I go in to make my works, by into, I mean the studio phase or the mind of the studio, if what that piece is going to be worth commercially walks into the studio with me, it's already in trouble. Yeah. Like if the last piece sold for X amount of dollars, and I think, man, I'd like to have that kind of money one more time. I take that in with me, I'm in trouble, the work's in trouble, and the piece is likely not to be completed. Yeah. Or to be completed and it'll be a disappointment because it can't live up to that. Because the marketplace doesn't wait for my work. It's not a loaf of bread. Right. And that's true for most, and there are artists that do work that way and it works for them. I know artists who sell the hell out of their work because there's a market waiting. Yeah. And maybe they don't even have to have that conversation. Maybe it's just.
Do you think those artists are creative? And maybe I misunderstood what you're saying, but they're creating art for a. Oh, that works.
Yeah. Sorry, I just getting blasted.
Yeah, I was getting really. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. You're gonna get.
Would you consider those artists creative?
Oh, this could.
I mean, and not. I mean, obviously, I think we all have creativity.
It's screwed. I mean, this could backfire on me, but I will say, rather than say whether they're creative or not, because I think that essentially all people are creative.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If you can cook an omelet, you've created something.
Yeah.
And is that there is. And this is a really woolly conversation that I'm only qualified to contribute at the smallest possible facet to, and then I could, and then I could backtrack from this as soon as someone comes in with a better argument. But there's in the 1960s, Thomas Merton, this great mystic, sort of Catholic monk mystic that lived at Gethsemane, Kentucky, wrote an essay called, there's a series of essays called Raids on the Unspeakable. And he wrote one on art and freedom. So it's worth noting that this was written in the context of the mid-1960s, and he was a very socially aware person. And so he talked about jazz as being the quintessential American black art form, the black American art form, because it was free, it was theirs, and it was created as an act of freedom and agency and expression. That's art. Now, when you make jazz to sell, that becomes product. It still has a creative aspect to it, and it comes from a place of, and maybe it wouldn't sell if there wasn't creativity within it. But when it becomes a product for the marketplace, then that conversation gets, it's not so much art anymore as it is product, but there's still art that precedes it, and that can happen in the visual arts and the plastic arts, as well, in the sense that there is absolutely nothing wrong with if someone is a painter. I have a friend who's a painter, a colleague who makes his living off of his paintings. They're very, very highly hyper photorealistic paintings of stones on a seashore. His name's Alan McGee out in Maine. Incredibly precise paintings. They sell very well to big, corporations buy them, and they're in big banks and everything, right? But when you talk to Alan, when I last spoke to Alan, what he was most excited about was his small body works that had to do with narrative and poetry and World War II histories and things that were not selling well, but he was terribly excited about those. So right, he's able to he doesn't expect to make a living off the things he's really into, right. But he makes a good living off these other things he's very good at that are still technically art.
Yeah.
And they're creative, but they've become, even in his own path, sort of the way to make the other thing he really wants to.
Relatively for him, that's something he can do in his sleep. I mean, not really, maybe, I don't know,
but it's not what he's most excited about. When you ask a creative person what they're most excited about, it's not necessarily likely to be the thing they're getting paid for.
Yeah.
Because it's always, there's this chance taking with, speaking for myself only, I am at my most creative when it feels like what I'm making is really a risky endeavor. It's an experiment that may not work out.
Yeah.
Like it could really fail wonderfully. Because then I feel really charged and challenged to see it through. When I've been the beneficiary of some really nice commissions where I've been paid up front to make a body of work. And as wonderful as that sounds, it's not that wonderful, because it feels like, well, if there's really no failure, then how interesting could this be? I mean, you could fail. Yeah. You could fail by just not honoring the contract, but that's not likely to happen for a lot of us.
Right.
Particularly, I mean, my thing is, no, I will fulfill this. That's not where the failure will come.
Right.
And but there's also there's this inability. I don't give myself, when I've had these couple commissions, I've made work that I really believe in, but I didn't give myself permission to take the work beyond where I thought it would please the person who commissioned it.
Yeah.
And frankly, that work was hard for me to get through, because I felt all my time like I was just plodding through it, and there was risk.
Okay.
Risks weren't that interesting.
Yeah.
And I hope that doesn't come across as arrogance.
No.
Because I hope that that's not the case. But there's something about, really robust creative endeavors have an element that this could very much fail. And if that's the case, you've really got to give yourself all over to it and allow it to become something that you didn't see when you began it. And the works that have been most successful for me are the ones that came out very differently than what I meant them to be when I began. Because they either, the model failed, or the piece went to a place I didn't know it was going to go, or something happened that was out of my control. Right. And I really relish those experiences.
Well, and you spoke about work challenging you. I was going to ask next, how are ways that maybe you challenge yourself? But you would say you do that with every project, right? Or
Well, I wish to. I've lost some courage over the last couple of years, just out of sort of just weariness, and I've not made some work that was as courageous as I once would have tried. Part of that's just, yeah, it's just sort of a weariness and a need to make money from the art.
mm-hmm.
The shift from the Wichita space to getting a day position is an experiment that we should regroup, in 6 months or a year. We
Absolutely.
really should continue this
Please.
conversation, because I'm going to Oregon. I didn't mean to go to Oregon, but that's where the opportunities presented itself. My thinking is that when I get there and I have this 8-hour day job, which is enough, it's a night, if the job is enough to cover us, that my art can become something it hasn't been able to be in 5 years, which is whatever it wants, at all or no cost. Like, it could just be anything. It doesn't have to have any commercial outcome. It doesn't mean it won't be of commercial value. I mean,
Right.
It doesn't. None of that has to be affixed to it in the process. And I foresee in the near future being able to take risks and leaps and junctures with my work that have nothing to do with its commercial outcome. And I've not given myself permission to do that in probably 10 years.
Okay.
And I sent you the link to the Toyganic film, did I not?
Yes.
Okay, so thinking that piece in a lake was a bit of a risk.
Yeah.
Because I really didn't know how deep. I knew the lake wasn't that terribly deep, and it was a man-made thing, It wasn't, there were no tides. It was self-contained. It was that property. Some people that we kind of knew said, "Oh no, it's fine. It'll be there. It's private property." So there wasn't all the risks I could have taken, right?
Yeah.
I didn't. When I went back to find it, I frankly didn't know where it was. I didn't know how far down it was, and that's a lot of work to sink in a pond. Hope you get it back. And so I haven't given myself permission to do that since that work, and that was 2005. Because
Wow.
what if I found it? How do I pay my mortgage? Right?
Yeah.
And I would love to go back to that kind of work. I say go back, not go back. I would love to allow these things to get away from me in the future, in the hopes that and I don't mean that I mean that, I don't know if I mean that as literally as that sounds. I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Or maybe they'll just be kind of funky and people go, and cool, but not really worth much. I don't know. I'm pretty excited about it. I told you I used to cartoon.
Yeah. Well, I've seen some of them, and I didn't know you did that until, obviously, your Facebook page. But
an individual cartoon is not worth any money.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, unless you're like Charles Schultz or Bill Watterson, yes, but not for most of us.
Yeah.
It's what the cartoon conveys that's of culture, is of value. It's what the cartoon gives to people that's of value.
Right.
Laugh, an understanding, a moment of reprieve from their shitty day-to-day existence or whatever. That's the value.
Yeah.
But you can't really it's very hard to say that the cartoon itself is worth $100 or $25 or $300. Yeah, it could be, and technically not. That's not it. And I'm leaning back towards that model, that the things I could make by being sustained during a daily job could be whatever they are. And I'm not naive enough to say they won't be of worth at some level, because I have this career that sort of sustains. I've become branded in a way that is kind of hard to get out from under, whether I want to or not. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble now. If you have
No, are you? Well, just and we've been recording for an hour, and I'm sorry if you had something else going on, but this is all been really great to me.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the cartooning, and you talked about this new experience where you'll be. I mean, I guess, is the risk gone when you are when it's paid for, when it's I feel like I maybe know where you're going to go with the answer, but I'll put it out there. And this new thing that you're going forward with, is the risk? Are you worried that the risk is gone and that might affect the work?
Yeah, now there is that. That's a very astute question, and the proof will be, the response to that will probably come out of the experience that follows next. Will a certain modicum of comfort or of financial assurance Well, that takes some of the legs up from underneath some of the better risks I could take with my art. And that's a, if there's a place where I could respond to the notion of fear or failure. I don't say I didn't mean to imply I live a life without fear. It's just not a very good idea. It's not that often that I recognize it as such. But I would say that if I could harbor a fear for my art practice, it would be that a certain level of comfort could take the edge off of some of the things I make.
Mm.
If the edge comes off of me, it can't help but take the edge off my work. They're this.
Yeah.
So if my edge is ameliorated, what happens to the art? Does the art become less edged and more comforting and more whatever? It's not unlikely. But a lot of the edge of my work, if I look back at some of the works that would be considered to have this sort of, let's slice open the belly of the American dream and see what the steaming guts look like kind of aspects of my work, like who were all the people that it was never available to and stuff like that. That work was born of a Randy that doesn't even exist right now. I mean, I'm just not, since the Miami break and then this sort of, now in my early 50s, trying to spend more time sort of bringing my shit down a little bit more time in mental silence, and a little bit more time recognizing how deep a lot of people's issues are, and that my making a thing about this isn't going to fix that. I couldn't go back to that work anyway, some of that early work, because that work was born out of this sort of youthful exuberantism, arrogance, ego drive. Isn't that wrong? Isn't that wrong? Don't you see this? Don't you see this? Don't you get it? This finger pointing,
right?
Political cartoonism. Like, don't you get it? And I don't believe that that's. I'm having this very gradual understanding that things are never as binary as I thought they were for so long. It's not left and right. There's this very, very large spectrum, and there's all these aspects to it, and it's not left, right, black, white. It's not that. And I used to work from that position quite a bit, or take great leverage from that position. It's a great position to be in as a young, aggressive artist who has something to say, because you're bound to find an audience, because there's always a left and a right, or people that perceive things as such. Mm. We live in a very binary culture. I mean, we don't have to get into the current political spectrum, but like we're being told this is left and right. Like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's a big woolly mess, and there's so many sides to it you can't even begin to encompass them all. And now that I am starting to see things through that way, the work I can't. There's I couldn't imagine what the work would be next, even if I weren't hoping for some sort of modicum of just pay scale comfort. And so I'm really puzzled, because I say that, but there's like two bodies of work I'd really like to get to, and I'm hoping that this next job will enable that. Because one of them does have a lot of, has immense potential has real potential for commercial success. And it's a series of pieces I want to do that come off of the machine of Dispel Sadness that are just very chromatic, custom car finishes, very polished, very visually striking. Those are works I didn't allow myself to do when I thought everything I had to do had to be very conceptual, had an edge to it, had to address some socio-political commentary.
Right.
These works don't. These works are more about my first love affairs with custom cars.
Yeah.
There's not unlikely to be a market for that.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's that. So you don't call me bullshit a year later when you go, I thought you said you weren't going to make work that was commercial. No, I don't mean it that won't happen. But then there's another body of work I want to do in the worst way. I keep saying that. I'm not saying things in such a binary way, but I am a very binary person in my creative practice. I have these things I want to make that are about beauty and shiny and glossy and cars and spaceships. And then I have these stories I want to tell really badly about, they're sort of introspective and self-evaluating. And I have this narrative body work called Star Honky, which is basically about this white guy that goes to space in the 60s on this solo government-funded mission that's completely flawed from the get-go. And he comes back and he lands in 2017, and it's the strangest planet he's landed on, because he left as this white dude in the 60s and comes back and doesn't and the strangest place he's been in 50 years is Earth. And like he doesn't even know he's back, right? And it's done in a graphic novel cartooning style, which is really loose. It's not nearly as refined as my sculptures. And I get so excited when I'm doing it, because I don't think it's of any I don't know if it's of any worth to anyone but me.
Right.
But I feel like when I make a living working for this company, I could just work on Star Honky, and who cares?
Yeah. If
it's worth anything. It doesn't matter. So there you go. I mean, those are two things. There is some relationship to them, but I see one as one thing and one as the other, and hopefully the job will be the security of the job, which won't be ideal. I frankly, I know the owner pretty well, known him for a long time. He's not the easiest person to work for. This is not going to be some cakewalk in there. I would love to stay in Kansas City. We just love Kansas City, and I'm not terribly excited about living in Beaverton, Oregon, and working in a factory during the day. But it's not. This isn't some sort of fantasy thing that's just all of a sudden falling into our lap. But it seems like the most likely model by which I can keep. I can take my creative processes and have them in a place where they can sort of be insulated from all the things that have been hammering at them for the last 5-10 years, and see what's left, and then see what grows out of that. I'd say see it as an experiment, failing upwards.
Yeah.
I do see the next year as failing upwards.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I just have two more questions, but and these are more practical or practically minded. But if I had to ask you, what are two things that a person trying to strengthen their creative mind could do now to better themselves? What would those two things be?
Create at whatever point of the day works for the person. Find get at least 20 minutes of silence. No, I mean a total, just no music. Just go for a walk. It could be exercise. Could be sitting in a chair. It's hard. It's really hard. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying it like it's easy to do.
Right.
20 minutes of just an attempt at just bringing all the noise down, because people who aspire to be creative persons, who have a creative drive. I'm going to say this, and hopefully I won't come off like some sort of knowing person, but I'm going to argue that, speaking to you creatives, you have it already. You have within you what you need to work from. You'll always have to be hunting around trying to find it elsewhere. Trust yourself that it's within you. And to articulate that point more from a personal perspective, when I do my 20-minute silent meditations in the morning, and by silent, I mean 20 minutes of trying to not think thoughts. Silence. Now I got a little white noise. I use a little electric fan, so I get that hum, that little nice white noise hum. I sit down, I set my phone timer for 20 minutes, and I just chill the F out. And I just spend 20 minutes in an effort not to think thoughts. And by not think thoughts, I don't mean push them away. I'll recognize each thought as it comes in and just say quietly, I'll get to you in 20 minutes or 19 minutes. Let it go. Don't hang on to any of them. And I'd say in 20 minutes, I get about 2 minutes of actual,
right. Yeah.
At best.
Yeah.
At anything, I get 2 out of 20. But what happens is, and I'm a morning person, so that this may work for people who have better, their power band is another part of the day or nighttime. What happens is that my innermost creative drives survive that 20 minutes, and those are the ones waiting for me at the end. And all the other shit, like Brad and Angelique, because that some of my phone decided that I wanted to know about that this morning. You know, like, don't waste your goddamn time thinking of looking up two actors you'll never meet whose marriage didn't work out. You can go next door and talk to your neighbors about that, right? And I don't mean to be judgmental of people that are into that, but we are fed constant information about what we ought to be thinking about, and that is death to creatives. I'm not saying you can't consume all day long things that are good for you in your creative practice. I do a lot of research. I do a lot of reading. I look up imagery. I consume the hell out of stuff. But create a sacred space for yourself once a day and allow yourself to be in that space without anybody else throwing anything at you. And it's hard. Sometimes it seems like the longest 20 minutes ever. Because some people go, oh my God, I don't want to be alone with me. Or this sounds boring. Yeah. Try it.
Yeah. Well, and some people might look at that and go, 20 minutes, like what's 20 minutes of quiet going to do? And it's like, try it.
Well, I am a lot less of a dickhead than I was a year ago. I mean, it plays out all day long. I'm a lot mellower in traffic. Mm-hmm. I don't know, man. It's better than a pill. It totally works. And, there's lots of avenues to go look this stuff up. It goes way back. Transcendental meditation is something a lot of people started trying in the 60s and what have you. You can call it whatever you want. I don't have an ascribed name for it. I follow a certain source, but it doesn't have anything to do with what anyone else would do. But it could be a walk. But just as a creative, the closing statement, the statement I mean to make is that trust that within you, your best intentions are within you. They're not going to come in an email or a Facebook post or from somewhere else. You already have them available to you. Trust yourself that if you can get some of your white noise out of the way, that they'll come to you. But they're underneath a layer of a lot of stuff that's going on, and we've never been so distracted as humans. And creatives are alternately fed. I mean, in some sense, you got to imagine that someone who was an artist in the 14th century could not even begin to believe the wondrous amount of stuff we have access to now. And the other aspect of that, we can't not even believe how much sacred space they had while they were trying to survive. Yeah. Die at 31 from some sort of weird disease. But that being said, I can't overestimate the power of just the creative richness of trusting yourself to have within you what you need for that day's creative endeavors. The knowledge of what's good for you and what isn't, and finding a little quiet place and a time to allow yourself to just be alone with that shit, and not expect it to come from somewhere else.
Cool. That's kind of all I have as far as specific questions. But was there anything else that maybe we didn't get to, or something that you maybe wanted to stress that I didn't ask you about? Just about the subject of failure or fear and creativity.
Well, I mean, just a couple things. I'm a big proponent of reading, and there's no hierarchy in format. It could be, doesn't have to be on paper. I don't mean that. I find that when I lose my, I'll just say this little short anecdote, and then because I'm getting lost in my own thoughts now, but I'd read once that in New England in days of old, when the snow would become so terribly deep, and farmers, and probably in the Midwest too, but when they knew that very deep snows were coming, they would tie a rope from the house to the barn where the cattle and the livestock were and everything, so that when the snow got so deep and you couldn't see anymore, they would follow the rope out to the barn, milk the cow, gather the eggs, take care of the animals, and follow the rope back to the house. And that's a good metaphor. I would advise any creative to find something rather concrete and tie a rope to it. And when you get lost and you get scared, or you feel you failed, or you feel too much is going on, that you can attach yourself to that thing. For me, there's a couple books that work for me. A few fiction, a few nonfiction, and I keep them around, and they're very threadbare because there's a term that's a place of recovering our best intentions. Back to the belief that within us are our best intentions. We can trust ourselves, And sometimes it can be just, for some people, I know for me too, it can be like, in my work, what's that first book you read or was read to you as a child that just blew your heart opened to? Like Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell, or Madeline L'Engle, Wrinkle in Time, or the Hobbit, or Harry Potter for a whole generation now. Have that thing around as an object. Even if you don't read it, have it somewhere where you can get to it when you get scared or when the snow's too deep. Because the web might fail you.
Yeah.
Or the social media might not support you. But I'm a firm believer in objects, the company of objects, and in friends and in cats. And have a cat, have a dog, for God's sake. Have a pet if you can. But some sort of physical, concrete thing that reminds you of your place of best intentions, or the first thing you fell in love with, or something that you read that when you read it, it made your heart grow one size larger that day. Like the Grinch. Keep company with some of those things. Even if you live in a little tiny place, keep a little bit of good company and have it where you can get to it when you get scared or when you feel you get lost. And that's unique to each person who that is. For me, it's a handful of books that I always have around, and I know I can get to them. It's a couple cats. Spend a lot of time rubbing on the cats. And those are just really simple, concrete things that are good for creatives to recognize. And oftentimes, wherever we all work for our living, we won't have access to those at our work, but you can take that book to work and just slip it somewhere, or that thing, some little amulet, object, some reminder. Yeah. It's kind of simple but it's concrete.
Mm-hmm. Well, I you talk about social media and stuff, and sometimes we just let those things guide our day. We don't realize what the influence is, but yeah, those are really great. It's really great advice.
It'll be a few years before we really have any sense of the scope of how much we've been shifted, just evolutionarily speaking, by social media. Mm-hmm. We're in the midst of the early stages of it, and I just read a big essay on it this morning, and it's so attractive, but it's way too early to know if we're just, what it's doing to us, for us, not for us. Mm-hmm. And have a very dear a friend whose life was self-taken, largely, it seems, based on the consumption of social media, and how much that person allowed social media to define their self. And we got to be careful, be watchful about what we consume and how much of it, and how much we don't trust ourselves to know who we are. So, kind of heavy, not kind of a heavy landing, but creatives are particularly prone to ingestion of all sorts, right?
Right.
Whether it be caffeine to social media to whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's something I do find consistent with a lot of creative types is we're very susceptible to what we ingest in terms of to how healthy we are as a creative individual.
Yeah.
It's very important to watch that and just be self-aware.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, it speaks back to what you were talking about of just, being aware of yourself and then doing the work of.
I know people that can drink gallons of beer and make good work in the morning, right? I'm not one of them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but yeah. They know themselves. Yeah.
They know themselves. Yeah, know thyself, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, that's all I had, unless you had anything else. Thank you for talking to me.
The thoughts all day long about things I wish I'd have said better, wish I hadn't said it all, but it's done. It's done is done.
Yeah.
So, hey, in a year or so, let's reconvene.
Yeah, absolutely.
See what happens.
So,
see how this grand experiment fails or doesn't. Fails upward.
Yeah. No, absolutely.